Good morning, and thank you all for being here. So my name is Sean Jeffers, and I'm a volunteer with GLSEN Greater Cincinnati. My full-time work is at Youth at the Center, and I do a lot of youth leadership development and diversity, equity, and inclusion work. And so our work with GLSEN is primarily around safe schools. So I'm going to share my screen to give a little bit of an overview. So GLSEN, we're a chapter of a national organization, so there's branches all across the country, and our focus is really on creating, wanting to make sure every member of every school community is valued and respected regardless of sexual orientation or gender identity or expression. And even though our focus is on schools, we do a lot of presentations like this to community members, to different organizations, workplaces, because the things that we learn about what works in schools, we also learn about works in workplaces and neighborhoods and community organizations. And so we'll kind of talk through some of those as we go through. This is a real quick overview. If you are somebody who loves stats and data, like that's your jam, you can go to glsen.org/research and download the full 147-page National School Climate Survey. If that is not how you want to spend your Wednesday, then I'm just going to give you a couple quick pieces. And so one, the National School Climate Survey is done every 2 years. So the 2019 survey was out in the field all of last year and will be released this fall. So these are the results from the 2017 survey, since we don't have 2019 yet. But this is get updated every 2 years, and not a whole lot shifts. It's a little bit of incremental maybe progress that happens. But 23,001 students you see across the country took this survey, and every student who took it self-identified as somewhere along the lesbian, gay, bisexual, transgender, queer, questioning, that LGBTQ spectrum. And 87% said they routinely experienced victimization and discrimination in their school or heard anti-LGBT language, which unfortunately, if anyone has ever been in a school, should not surprise you. That unfortunately there's a lot of, just kind of comments, things being said. But the things that do stand out as really concerning is that over half, 55% of students didn't report it to an adult because either they doubted anything would be done or didn't trust that. And then this maybe gives us some more insight why they didn't report it. 56% reported hearing homophobic remarks from school staff, and 71% reported hearing negative remarks about gender expression. So this isn't just, sometimes we pass off bullying as things like boys will be boys, kids will be kids. We kind of say these things to sometimes not take it seriously. And I think this really helps us understand that this isn't just a thing with young people. That if we assume young people do this, there's not some, unfortunately, there's not some magic moment where you hit some age and then you're like, oh, all of my former prejudices just magically have gone away. The only way that happens is by intentional work, conversation, thoughtfulness around that. So if there are young people who are engaging in these behaviors, unless they have some intervention, opportunity to meet, learn, experience an individual from a different background, belief or identity, then they become adults who sometimes have these same dynamics. This bottom part of this slide is a little bit of what we talk about is kind of the making the business case, if you will. Sometimes in schools, educators, administrators will kind of say we want to have this conversation, but we're worried, what if a parent complains? What if some of these worries happen? And so sometimes there's some folks who are, we kind of say empaths, right? The empaths, they're I see a young person in front of me who is struggling, needs support, and I want to show up and be there for them. Adults, who sometimes their focus is more on risk management, sometimes need some of these things. So one of the things that we've learned is that students who experience high levels of in-school victimization based on their identity, they're more likely to miss a day of school, have a lower grade point average, half as likely to pursue post-secondary education, and have lower levels of self-esteem, higher levels of depression, and unfortunately higher rates of suicide. And when schools are graded, annually when that school report card comes out from the state of Ohio or state of Kentucky, depending on where you're at, that the things are oftentimes graded as how often are students showing up, how well are they performing, and what are they doing after they graduate. And so these are the things that we see, when we support students, it makes an environment that are going to help schools overall. and really be that support. So that's the quick overview of the school climate survey. There are kind of 4 school solutions that have kind of come up. Is that gender and sexuality alliances, where there's some type of club group where people can kind of see themselves, inclusive curriculum, so that people, can kind of learn in schools around, see people from history or in English or, music or in different subjects that they can relate to. Supportive school staff, so when young people see supportive staff, and then a comprehensive bullying or harassment policy. So when we think about these in terms of a workplace, kind of some different things kind of happen around what that looks like. And so a gay straight alliance, where we say that's an intervention in a school, sometimes in workplaces that might be employee resource groups, affinity groups, ways that people can kind of feel like they're not alone, that they have some peer support. Comprehensive bullying or harassment policies, that sometimes can be, what are the policies on the books around harassment in an organization, or diversity policies, training, different things like you all are doing today. Inclusive curriculum. This can really be a thoughtfulness around, like, what are the, do we have inclusive benefits? Do we cover, same-sex partners, adoptions from same-sex partners, things like that. It can be like, what do our policies say around some of these pieces? Thinking about forms, like this can be a big one, is that sometimes forms can say like, mother's name, father's name or something, as opposed to parent or guardian, 1, parent or guardian 2, like allowing things of that sort. Communication, LGBTQ plus community outreach. Do you have a presence or involved in Pride or different events, things of that sort, and thinking about ways to be there. And then the last is supportive staff. At schools look just like supportive staff at organizations, that it's folks who are willing to show up and kind of be in there. And I think an overall piece too is maintaining privacy and respect. Is I was doing a training one time for a school, and one of the teachers said that they had a student in their class who identified as trans, and we're describing this student, and another teacher was like, I have that same student in my class and they've not said anything to me about, their identity. And so one of the things that we have to recognize is that if a student has not shared something with a teacher, maybe they do not see that teacher as safe or as welcoming in that space. And so that's something to kind of think about a little bit with that. So that is our kind of overview, a little bit of like how we kind of think about what some of these things might look like within a workplace. Having shared that, I'm going to stop sharing for a minute. I want to hear from you all, if you will, kind of in the chat, just so we can kind of make sure the conversations we're about to get into, where we talk a little bit more about terminology, about identity, about resources being, a support, that they can best be tailored to the things you are dealing and navigating in your daily work, or either it's community or local. So if there's a question you hope we answer on today's call, or information you would specifically like, if we can have people put that in the chat, just to be able to kind of be able to capture that. So if there's a question you hope is answered on today's call, or specific resources or things you would like, give people about a minute to put some of those in the chat. Great. Thank you, Manali. So where are we working, and where's, where are there opportunities? Yeah. Yeah, so we can talk about that as we move forward. So if there are other questions or things, feel free to list those so we kind of add, kind of address them and kind of talk about them as we move forward. We're going to do an activity, and what I'm going to ask is if you are willing to come off mute for this activity, to engage in this piece, or just kind of be able to say it out loud where you're at. But I want to ask you, we see 15 words on here, and you're not going to say the word. I'm just going to ask you to say the color of the word, starting in row 1, going across, going to row 2, going across. And so just ask people, they'll come off mute and just say the color for these 15 words.
Red.
Blue. Purple.
Green.
Green. Orange.
Oh.
Yeah. So this one, right, pretty easy. Like, we're kind of getting the hang of it. This one's pretty easy. I want to switch the slide. And again, just want you to say the color of the word this time.
Red.
Red. Purple. Red. Blue.
Blue. Green.
Orange. Yellow.
Orange.
Purple. Black. Brown.
No, we're supposed to be saying the actual.
You were saying just like in the last one, right? Like, we were saying the color of the word.
Okay.
Again, we are saying the color that the word is in. But,
Oh, okay.
yeah. But when you look at this one, what made this one more difficult to just say the color that the word was in?
Because the words are color names.
The words are color names, so it takes a second to try and decipher these different pieces. Whereas before, it was just like, say the color, and it was like, I'm ignoring what the word is.
Right.
And able to look past it. But this time, like, it's a little more difficult to ignore the word and be like, I see the letter's blue, but it's in red. Like, and so like that conflict. And so that's one of the things we want to kind of think about as we start to get into a little bit of exploring identity, is that sometimes when we work with LGBTQ individuals, is that what we see might be a little different than how they identify or what they share with us, in different pieces. And so just recognizing that our perception might not always be their reality. And so how we really kind of think about meeting people where they're at in that piece. So one thing I will share is we have a video, and I'll share these links and resources with Jennifer to distribute. This video is about 10 minutes. It's on our YouTube page, but it features the story of local students from the Cincinnati area. And a 10-minute video doesn't play great over Zoom. And so we'll share the link so you can watch that on your own, just to hear kind of student voices around some of the things that are coming up, if that's of interest to you. And where we're going to go next is the gender unicorn. And this is really going to help us start to understand the dynamics of identity. So one of the things we want to kind of share as we start off here is to say, never underestimate the power of oppressed people to come up with more terms and labels to define ourselves by. Like, you cannot catch up. And so the idea can sometimes be that, like, you're like, all right, like, there was LGBT, and then there was the Q and the P and the I and the A, and it just kind of keeps growing. And so what I'll ultimately say is, you don't have to know every word that exists in the dictionary. That's what Google is for. Google can help you learn all the terms and identities that people have. What we do need to generally understand is that when people are coming out to us, they're coming out to us in a couple key areas. Either they're coming out to us about gender identity, how they identify in terms of their gender expression, how they express their gender, or physical or emotional attraction. Sometimes sexual orientation is how it's described. And so along these three lines, we're going to kind of walk through what this looks like, so we get a little understanding of at least when people come out, where they might be falling within some of these spectrums, so we can best help support them, and also for our own benefit, be able to understand how we might need to amend or change some of our behaviors or speech to best include them. So first, I want to share here in the middle, we're going to start this line here, sex assigned at birth. And so before we're born, most of us are, most of us are assigned an identity. And so the doctor, based on the sonogram, starts to have a You know, so the doctor kind of says you're having a boy or a girl, and then once you find out somebody's pregnant, then the questions oftentimes are asking a lot about, oh, what are you having? Like, and then once you find out what somebody is having, then it's like rooms are painted certain colors, or toys are painted or bought that are certain types, or, you know, certain types of clothes are bought that have different images on them that kind of sometimes represent different aspects. Expectations are made about who this child is going to be when they grow up. So some of these things kind of come out. And so what we have to recognize is that this is not an identity we hold necessarily. This is just what is assigned to us. Like, the doctor doesn't give the survey to a baby and say, like, baby, what do you want to be? The doctor makes an assessment based on genitalia and then puts that on the birth certificate. One important thing to note about, specifically for those folks living in Ohio, is we see here a third dot on our gender unicorn intersex. And so traditionally, most individuals that are born 99.8% of folks who are born are typically assigned either male or female at birth on their birth certificate. But some individuals when born are intersex, and this might, historically, the term sometimes was hermaphrodite, but kind of might have elements of, both or indistinguishable or sexual organs that sometimes happen. And so historically, what would happen is the doctor would make a best guess for intersex people and just say, we think this child is probably going to be a girl or a boy based on the development of the genitals, and then guessing. And in about 15% of those cases, what research has shown is that doctors were wrong. When a child hit puberty and they started developing, because physiologically there's not that much difference between boys and girls at young ages, but at puberty, when bodies start to change, that intersex individuals started to develop differently than they had been assigned at birth. So for a lot of intersex parents today, the dynamic is really trying to allow children, that opportunity to develop and get older and not necessarily have a doctor kind of make a guess at birth. And why it's important for Ohio is one of 4 states in the country that whatever is on the doctor puts on your birth certificate, there is currently no legal way to change that. So if you were an intersex individual, the doctor took a guess, hit puberty, you started developing differently than the doctor's guess, and the doctor was wrong, your birth certificate cannot be legally changed in Ohio right now. And so there's a pending court case that has been pending for a long time that has kind of held it up from the Office of Vital Statistics doing anything. But it kind of gives us an dynamic a little bit around sex assigned at birth, just how that sometimes can really limit individuals by assigning or placing things on them that might not be their reality. So that's kind of that first piece. Next up, we'll go to gender identity and look at gender identity. So we see the gender identity as a unicorn. The unicorn is kind of thinking of a rainbow, which is kind of basically how do we think about ourselves in terms of gender. So if you were somebody like myself, for instance, so my sex assigned at birth is I was assigned male at birth. I still identify as a man. And so my sex assigned at birth and gender identity align. And so I would say I'm a cisgender male, C-I-S-G-E-N-D-E-R, cisgender. So that root word cis just means staying on the same side of. So when we think about transaction, transmission, something about, trans means some kind of crossing over, some kind of shift is occurring. And so if you are somebody who your sex assigned at birth does not align with your gender identity, then you might be transgender or non-binary and not necessarily fit into that male-female options that are often offered. And so this is why it's important when we think about forms, is allowing people sometimes opportunities to say, do you identify, how do you identify in different ways, and allowing people a non-binary option to identify outside just male or female boxes. And also sometimes I prefer not to say, because sometimes people aren't always sure what people are going to do with that information and if they feel safe sharing that. Couple things about gender identity that are important to note. One, in stages of childhood development, gender identity happens between 2 to 4 years old is when this starts. Now, children 2 to 4 years typically don't have the terminology to say that, like, I am questioning my gender or the sex I was assigned at birth, right? Like, but there's maybe starts to be ways that actions play out or intentions are kind of made. And so one of the things we talk about, there's a lot of parents that we've worked with who have young children who, you know, in elementary school, and educators in elementary school who've kind of reached out and said, like, I have a trans student in my class in first grade or second grade, like, how do I navigate this? And historically, I would say GLSEN worked more at high schools because we work more with gay students or lesbian or bisexual students, and that happens typically after puberty. But trans, because gender is, you know, we're starting to form our understanding and sense of gender around 2 to 4 years old, can happen very early for a lot of young people. And so the way we sometimes know something is not a phase or, you know, just a kind of a temporary piece for a young person, it's right. Many of us might have had times in our life. So if you are identify as a man and you grew up though in a house where there was maybe a lot of older sisters or things, and there just happened to be, you know, toys that were traditionally considered girl toys, dolls or different things, and you just played with them because those were around. Like, that wasn't something you were demanding, it was just circumstance. Same thing if you were a girl and you did more like, you know, climb trees when we're outside, height, things that are sometimes traditionally seen as boy things, like, you know, that those are, you know, depending on those circumstances. But when young people, what we say, are insistent, consistent, persistent about their identities, then that's really where we start to recognize this might not just be a phase, but this is part of their identity, part of that development. And it doesn't just happen for young people. We know that a lot of folks are not in supportive environments where they don't feel like they can come out, they can explore, maybe until college, maybe until adulthood, that these dynamics happen to them just because they, you know, did not have access, exposure, comfort. You know, sometimes these dynamics can happen all across, but it's that idea of insistent, persistent, consistent. So one quick story to share is there was a parent who had a 9-year-old child, and they kind of were describing their child very depressed, just kind of never happy, things like that. And so the child was like saying they were a girl, and dad just thought like child was acting out. And so one day dad was like, all right, you know what, fine. Let's settle this once and for all. We're going to Macy's, we're picking you out a dress, and we're going to dinner tonight with grandma, and you're gonna wear that dress to the restaurant. And so this is what we're gonna do. So dad thought, like, I'm gonna show this child, like, you know, what it means. And so they went to Macy's, picked out a dress. When the child like opened the dressing room, like, and was in the dress and started twirling and had a giant smile on their face, dad was like, oh, this did not work out how I thought it was. But like, it opened up eyes. So like, the child was being insistent, persistent, consistent around, this is what I need to feel like people see me as I see myself, as I identify, in that kind of dynamic. So that's when we think about gender identity, some of those dynamics, how they play out. Next, with gender expression, we see the gender expression, we have the green dots, and the gender expression is kind of the outside of our unicorn. And this is all the ways we express ourselves. This could be our clothes, our mannerisms, our speech, our hair, our makeup, jewelry if we wear it, you know, all sorts of things that we might have. It's about our expression in this sense. So we see for this, there is feminine, masculine, other sometimes is referred to as androgynous, but these ideas around how some of these things play out for us. And with gender expression, there's a way that we sometimes express ourselves, and then there's a way that others sometimes perceive us based on those pieces. And so just recognizing that sometimes plays out for us. But a couple things around gender expression that are really important. We'll get there in a second, but when we think about attraction and sexual orientation, sexual orientation, that is internal. Like, you can't see who somebody is attracted to unless they're holding hands or somehow, you know, displaying that. But if someone is just by themselves, you can't necessarily see who they are attracted to. Similarly, gender identity, how we think about ourselves, we can't really see how people think about themselves or see how they identify. So the only one that is visible is gender expression. And so oftentimes this leads to a couple different dynamics. So one, many of us have probably heard the term gaydar. And so I want to share that if you leave today's presentation with nothing else, leave with the knowledge that gaydar is not real. It is pseudoscience. It is something that like people create to sit around or wherever and just kind of talk, but it is not a real thing. But what really is happening in that moment, though, is gender expression, Dar. Is that you are looking at a person, how they are expressing themselves, and then saying that person is expressing themselves in a way that maybe seems a little bit different than their gender expression, than their gender identity. So if you see a man who maybe has more effeminate mannerisms, or a woman, or somebody you're perceiving as a woman who maybe like is a little bit more butch in their appearance, that sometimes these dynamics play out in how we start to think about and then assign, you know, identities to people. But it's their gender expression that we're building a whole lot on that piece. And so that's why we kind of jokingly talk about gender expression, Dar, but also recognize that because gender identity and emotional and physical attraction are internal, this is the only one that's visible. It kind of starts to help us understand why sometimes people might feel the need to come out, is because aspects of my identity that are important to me aren't visible when you see me. So sometimes I have to share those so that they're present in the room so people know, so that they can best support or navigate. And we'll kind of talk more about some of the coming out and the supports around that, but just kind of understanding that piece. The last piece we'll look at down here is physical and emotional attraction. As I said, sometimes, you know, kind of collectively talked about as sexual orientation, but the reason they separate them, and I think is important, is we're physically attracted to what we can see. And so when we just talked about gender identity and gender expression is the one we can see. So physical attraction most often aligns with gender expression, whereas emotional attraction is more about how people identify, how we connect with like aspects of people's identities, personalities, like those dynamics. And so we emotionally are attracted oftentimes more to gender identity in that aspect. And so for myself, again, like just to kind of show how some of these things play out. So my sex assigned at birth, I was assigned male at birth. My gender identity, I still identify as male. For gender expression, I would say I'm about probably like 75%, you know, masculine, maybe about 25% feminine, other androgynous, you know, in dynamics. So I dress, you know, typically in men's clothes from the department store. I don't wear jewelry or makeup, things of that sort. My favorite television show, that was Project Runway, and has been for a long time, which is not necessarily peak masculinity. But then at the same point, much to the dismay of my partner, I would say, is I watch and really love sports. And so I stayed up way too late last night watching Game 4 of the NBA Finals and you know, just different things that like, but it's an aspect as an adult, all of these pieces can be part of who I am. That I can watch sports and Project Runway, or the new Heidi and, you know, 10 movie, or on Amazon Making the Cut. You can check those all out in your spare time. But anyway, all of those aspects, that could be who I am. But when I was younger, I'm an Eagle Scout. I was active in Boy Scouts for many years. I didn't always feel like I was able to express some of these pieces because scouting wasn't inclusive to gay and lesbian folks. And there was just sometimes these limitations, you know, in this thing. So I felt a lot of times as I was younger, I had to fit into a box that people expected of me. And so I think that's something really being thoughtful is, do we allow people space to express themselves? I think one of the, you know, if we will, silver linings of the pandemic is that we're so much more open to seeing people's realities than we were before. Sometimes workplaces were very, very limited on what you were allowed to show, you know, what you were allowed to share at house, you know, but like now I can like look at Kate's screen, right, and see like Kate has a lot of books behind her. I have a lot of books behind me. Kate and I maybe could talk about books. Like there's things like, right, like my dog has already joined the conversation at one point and probably will again when he gets tired of sleeping on the desk, right? Like it's so, but we start to learn more about people. And so I think that aspect of just being more open to what each person brings and how people show up and just, you know, that staying curious about each of us, I think can be important. And then the last part when we think, so I happen to identify as gay, so I'm typically physically and emotionally attracted to men. Like that's kind of where I would place myself. But as we think about different dynamics, like different people we meet, sometimes these aspects might play out for them. So two terms I want to share real quick that sometimes come up is one is queer, that sometimes get discussed. And so people of an older generation sometimes might say, you know, like, yeah, like queer wasn't really a word I feel comfortable using because it was maybe used against me when I was in grade school or in middle school, high school, or these kind of things. Like it felt like more of a slur. Whereas younger folks are sometimes use queer as this opportunity to say, like, sometimes there's boxes, right? Like in Western society, we're very big on either or options. And that's, you know, that's sometimes a dynamic of, you know, kind of white supremacy or white dominant culture. Sometimes is we really limit of just being either or, not really allowing people to express themselves across those spectrums. And so sometimes folks who identify as queer kind of say, like, I'm okay being across that spectrum, of being able to understand, you know, different ways and being able to look at these pieces and not feel like I have to fit neatly into a box. With that. And so that's one of the pieces. The other word that sometimes come up is pansexual or pan. And so historically, like, you know, there was bisexual, which by the root word is two. And so when we think about looking at the gender unicorn, where we kind of see that there is 3 arrows for each of them, and there's different dynamics that like bi is beyond that too. And so some people kind of say when they're pan or pansexual that if I'm okay, you know, the one way I heard it described was like, hearts, not parts. Like I'm attracted to people across the spectrum, not necessarily to folks who have a specific set of like, you know, genitalia or something. And so really thinking about like the heart, the purpose of folks, you know, in that. But that pansexual, I think, is coming up. It doesn't mean that folks who identify as bi, which, you know, are opposed or only going to date men or women, like are only stuck on those two. But oftentimes it's just folks who are older, like, you know, bi was the term they grew up with, or like they embraced, and that's still where they're at. So just recognizing some of those kind of dynamics. Can I have a volunteer? We're going to look at a scenario of kind of putting this into another person's experience. And so we're going to look here. Have a volunteer read us Sky's story that's on the screen. Thanks, Kate. Yeah.
Hold on, I gotta close something. Okay. Sky was assigned male at birth, although Sky's never truly identified as completely male. Sky's gender expression has reflected that. Some days Sky will show up for classes in feminine clothes, other days it is all about donning a bow tie and a suit, and on others, Sky's clothes will pretty much be gender neutral, like jeans and a sweater. When it comes to attraction, Sky identifies as bisexual because Sky is attracted to both women and men. If you asked Sky for a term of self-identification, it would be queer.
Thank you. So we start to see like dynamics here around Sky talking about themselves. So Sky is assigned, and this is a slightly different tool than the gender unicorn, where it's kind of more of a continuum. And so there's different ways that sometimes this looks for individuals. But so for Sky, like their assigned birth sex was male, but gender expression all across the board, that can kind of shift based on what they're feeling like that day. Their gender identity might be gender fluid or might be queer, as it talks about, like that they're kind of open. And then their sexual orientation could be bisexual or pansexual, that they're, you know, open. And so it's dynamics. And so, but this kind of gives us an idea of looking at when people kind of share us identities, starting to understand where that might lie within some of the pieces for the you know, when we just looked at the gender unicorn, where it was like gender identity, gender expression, or sexual orientation or attraction. If there are any other questions about terms or things, happy to take those, but I want to share a short video that we're going to set up here. And let me stop sharing this and set that up. And this video is from a health clinic in, oh, come back. Okay, sorry. It's from a health clinic in New York. that kind of talks about like what they're doing as a institution to kind of think about pronouns for participants who come in.
Callen-Lorde strives to be a welcoming environment for all.
Using the correct pronoun has the power to change the game.
It is a step towards creating a supportive and respectful atmosphere.
Her,
Sie,
They,
she.
them.
My pronouns are he, him, and his, and she, her, and hers.
Pronouns matter because people matter.
Pronouns are as diverse as our community.
pronouns are as fluid as gender and sexual orientation.
Today, my pronoun is they. Tomorrow, he could be different, and it's who I am.
The Pronouns Matter campaign is one step Callen-Lorde is taking to continue improving the environment for all of our patients and to help get the word out that pronouns matter.
Her,
Him,
She,
hers, he.
My pronouns are she, her, and hers, and they, them, and theirs.
Using a person's correct pronoun is a sign of respect.
Everyone deserves to be respected.
everyone deserves to matter.
Employees wear buttons to help people around them use the correct pronouns.
Now, patients can use pronoun stickers to make sure people are using the correct pronouns.
So, the next time you're Callen-Lorde,
Grab a sticker and tell us your pronoun.
Let the world know that your pronouns matter.
And show people that they matter by using their correct pronouns.
Because pronouns matter.
pronouns matter.
Pronouns matter.
pronouns matter.
Pronouns matter.
And I matter.
That is a short video just kind of thinking about that. If there are any Pose fans on the line, you might have noticed Electra Abundance also making an appearance in that video. I'm gonna go back, because that kind of gives us a little bit just around pronouns, what we can do sometimes, like, you know, for examples, like I have like in my name here on Zoom, like my pronouns he, him, his added, so sometimes it can be in your signature, different ways to kind of let people know. And one of the ways that's important is if only individuals who are LGBTQ, like particularly trans or non-binary, if only them are showing pronouns, then sometimes it can feel like by having to share my pronouns that I'm outing myself in the process. Whereas when others are sharing their pronouns, it becomes a more normalized or thing that folks can feel that they are connected to. Awesome. So this is what to do if a student comes out to me, but similar if you're working with adults or things, similar types of dynamics. Last week we did a training, and like one of the things we shared at the training was I had LaShonda Sugg, and LaShonda is a colleague of mine who does a lot of work around trauma-informed care. And we kind of had this great conversation around applying a trauma-informed care lens to the coming out process. And this idea of oftentimes what is happening for someone before they're coming out, for the first time particularly, is there can be a real fight or flight, freeze dynamic maybe coming up for them. So I was working with a young person once, and they told me the first time I came out, I was in high school, it was to my mom, and we were in the car, and I'd made up my mind that I was gonna do it. But then I started thinking, I don't want it to be too far away from home in case she kicks me out and I have to walk home. And I don't want to do it when she's driving because I don't want her to get like surprised and like wreck the car. So he was like all of these situations, scenarios going through his mind around what could happen. And so he's like, I waited until we were about a mile from home. We were at a stop sign. I kind of turned to my mom and said, I'm gay, and then braced myself for the worst. And mom was kind of like, okay, like mom was not surprised, I think, but it was like, mom was kind of like, thank you, okay, great. Like, we can talk about this. And so, but it was just thinking about in that moment, all of the things on this person's head. And that's so many people's reality when they're coming out. So just that recognition that if somebody comes out to you, the first thing is listen. So the first person I came out to was in college. It was my ex-girlfriend, Katie, and we're still friends today. But it was about 45 seconds of me saying, Katie, because I think, and I kept saying until I could finally say, Katie, I'm gay. Like, and so sometimes, right, if we're on the phone with somebody and they're struggling, especially if we're kind of like good friends, we have a rapport with them, that sometimes it can just be like, all right, like when you get your words, we can come back to you, but I'm going to talk for a little while now. Like, and so we can kind of so we notice somebody's needing a moment to really like get their words, thinking about what does it look like to just listen, to stay present with somebody. When somebody finally shares something, as we talked about, like there's a whole lot of anxiety, a whole lot of worries and stress that they've kind of maybe laid into this scenario. So if we say something like, that's great, that's wonderful, you're gonna have a wonderful life, that's awesome, whatever like feels comfortable to you, it can kind of be a little bit of a positive shock to the system, because the person is maybe worried about something bad happening and they're like, wait, what did you just say? Like, you're happy for me? Like, this is good, like good news? What? Like, oh, okay. And so that can help kind of help in that dynamic. That if they use a term you're not familiar with, particularly if you're working with young people and they use a term and you're like, like that's a new term for me, can you tell me what that looks like? Because one thing I want to be clear is like, you can look at 2 different blogs and see that like sometimes individuals in the LGBTQ community can identify same word and use the term a little differently. So so sometimes there's that aspect if you need to know. But the other piece is like, so let's say a student comes out and says like, well, I identify as queer, and we might be like, like queer's not a word I really feel comfortable using. Well, here's the good news. Rarely, if ever, do you need to use someone's identity, right? Like after today's training, you don't need to like go talk to whoever like in your next meeting and be like, yeah, I just got done doing this training with the gay guy from Glisten. Like, it was like unnecessary information, right? Like, and so sometimes those aspects, that if someone has shared their identity, then they've shared their identity with you. And so there's a confidentiality aspect. So if somebody is not comfortable with if you're not as comfortable with the term or know what the term means too, you can just kind of stay in the moment saying like, thank you, like, and then maybe look it up, explore that later. The last piece is let me know how I can support you. I think sometimes, especially from those of us who are like social workers or in kind of social services, oftentimes like somebody comes to us for help and then we're like, all right, like let's get you some help. Like let's find some resources, let's find some things, like, and that can like unintentionally ratchet up that anxiety again, especially if you ask like a young person or something like, well, who else have you told? Have you told your parents? Have you told your siblings? Have you told? And then it could just be like, oh, I have so many more things I have to do, as opposed to staying in this moment and letting me get a win. So I think that's really important too, is just in that initial conversation, letting that door open. The other piece that's really important that we talk about, if a student comes out, if a person comes out to you and you don't feel like this is your area of expertise or area of comfort, is we talk about the handoff. So in a school setting, for instance, if a person comes to my classroom and tells me that they're gay, and I might not feel totally confident knowing how to support or what to say next, other than just like, well, thank you for sharing that. Like, I might say, you know what, Jennifer has some resources, or Melanie has some resources. Are you comfortable if we go down to their office or their classroom and can we talk with them? But the important part is I ask the student for their consent, and then I walk with them to that place. Same thing in a building, in an office. Like we ask, like if somebody is in a program, in a group, something that we're doing in a class, and then they come out and we're not sure, maybe we find a colleague who has some more support, more experience in this area to really connect them to. And we walk them, as opposed to just kind of somebody coming out and being like, ooh, not today, nope, not gonna do it. And so then it can be like the student is being put off. And if they have trusted you enough, or this adult has trusted you enough to share this part of their identity with you, and then we reject them, then that can really be difficult for them to overcome. But if we feel like we're not as confident or comfortable, just based on whatever factors there might be, that if we sometimes, do that power of the handoff to make sure that they feel like they have a supportive person who can really connect them and get them resources. So those are some of the key things about, you know, what to do if a student comes out. The other thing, what not to do if somebody comes out to you is, I knew it. Yes, your gender expression DAR might have been on point and you might have had it working, but in that moment, by saying, I knew it, you're making it about you, as opposed to staying present for another person. And I think, and that's just really what we need to be thoughtful of. How do we stay present for somebody else in this space? And then last, we'll share a few kind of quick ways to support. Again, we talk about students, but these are really some quick ways to kind of support individuals across the board if we're not working with young people, we're working with adults as well. But treat everybody as unique. Every person is at a different place in their coming out journey. If you've heard one coming out story, you've heard one. You don't know about all the coming out stories, you know, that are there. Coming out is different for sexual orientation than gender identity. So when I came out as gay, I just needed support and validation from friends and family that I confided in and shared, you know, with in my circle. If you come out as trans or non-binary, you need those same things, support and validation, but you might also need different pronouns, as we saw from the video that we saw. You might ask for a different name, different dress code, different restrooms, different locker rooms, all sorts of, you know, dynamics might come up in that aspect. And so thinking about what's possible, like we live right traditionally in a binary way that there's a men's room and a women's room. So what can we do sometimes to create space for individuals? And so one of the things we do at like our youth summit is we have 2 sets of restrooms. We have our youth summit at the NKU Student Union. One set of restroom, we create all gender restrooms. And there's signs for the day that say, these are open to anyone. You can go into any restroom, any stall that you're comfortable with. The other restroom really traditional. Sometimes, you know, people like, you know, so there's a traditional male and female gendered aspect. So I think some of these pieces are just there to kind of think about, but really finding out what people need in that coming out process and how we can best support them is important. When we think about avoid unnecessary gendering, so this is something that can kind of come up around the, you know, like when we work with young children, we might say one teacher shared with me one time, they told their classroom, they said like, go get this paper signed by mom. And like a week later, this child hadn't turned their paper in. And so she asked the child, like, why haven't you turned your paper in? And the child was like, I haven't seen my mom yet. And the teacher found out the mom was in jail, was in prison. And so the child wouldn't see the mom for a while, but the student took the very literal. So I think sometimes when we're thinking about asking young people, it's like, get this assigned by your grownups or by an adult in your house, and like ways that we can kind of have, you know, things that don't create gender. The other piece that sometimes happens is we kind of set up a lot of things is like, this is for boys, this is for girls, and kind of create that limitation. And so I run summer camps. And so one of the things we do at camp is we ask young people, we say like, all right, everyone find a friend, pair up. One of you is going to be peanut butter, one is going to be jelly. Awesome. And you know, my peanut butter's in a group over here, all my jelly's in a group over here. Now, normally you hear like a little bit of, wait, but we were pairing up, we were friends and we were going to be together. And I was like, yep, find new friends. Like peanut butter's over here, jelly's over here, right? Like, but you've stopped without just saying boys in one line, girls in one line. And because then if you have any young people, or even as adults, if you have those dynamics set up, is that sometimes people don't feel like they know where to go. And it doesn't feel like they have to out themselves in the process. So just recognizing those pieces. Weird, not wrong is a favorite phrase of mine that I think just this dynamic of when we are working with young people, not everything, or just people in general, we don't understand why people are doing always what they do. And a lot of times we look at people doing things and we're like, you know, if I was in their situation, I would do X, Y, and Z. But we're not in their situation. We don't know why they're making the decisions, like, and so generally, if they're not hurting themselves or not hurting another person with their actions, if it's just a matter of preference, they're doing something that would be different than I would do it, that it's important sometimes for us to think about weird, not wrong, and give grace to others so that we're not putting our values to others and expecting others to adhere to our methodology or our approach. We talked about pronouns already. Just recognizing that they, them, themselves, you know, is there. Find gender inclusive spaces if people, restrooms, locker rooms, different things if people inquire. And then the last part, I think, which is most important, we talked about this a little bit, the coming out, is don't make it about yourself. If you mess up a name, pronoun, etc., apologize, move on. A lot of times students have said they've just been sitting in class, doing nothing. A teacher says their old name or uses a wrong pronoun, and then the teacher's like, oh gosh, I'm never gonna get this right. And now the student has been taken out of a learning space because of the teacher's actions. And the teacher has not made that safe space. The teacher has now centered themselves as like, oh, it is so difficult for me to have to learn this new name or this pronoun. And it was like, as a teacher, you generally learn 150 names a semester, right? Like you think that's typically what happens is you have lots of classes of students. So one new name shouldn't be difficult. The reality is getting back to that color activity where we did, is sometimes we're not thinking of that person. We're having struggle thinking about the person as they identify. We're still stuck on maybe how we're perceiving them. And so just recognizing that we sometimes have to step out of ourselves. One way to help with like pronouns and things is I heard a parent one time share that when their child came out and they folded their laundry, every item of their child's clothes, they just in their head would say, this is his shirt. These are his shorts. And just trying to mentally practice, this is the pronoun. But I think the ultimate thing is for most of us, right? Like if we have siblings, if we, like parents sometimes call us the wrong name, might call us our sibling's name. So like I have 2 older brothers and my mom will sometimes say like, James, Michael, sometimes the dog's name is thrown in there for good measure. And, but it's this aspect is so the person who's most often going to mess up our names is usually our parents, just because they, and so it's not out of ill intent. And so just recognizing some of those ways. And so that's a little bit of some of the like best practices that we've got. So cool. So a couple of the questions, and if there's other questions, feel free to come off. But are we working in CPS or community centers? So Melanie, yeah, so we have some work in CPS. I will say historically, the schools that have had GSAs have been not the predominantly Black schools that we see. A lot of the high schools have not, but that is shifting and that is changing, and we're getting a lot more connection. And so I think, but it's been something that we're intentional about, but it's been more like Clark, Walnut, SCPA that have had a little bit more integrated schools historically, but I think that's been coming out more and more, is that there's been a lot more requests for support. But GLSEN, we provide free trainings, and also every Monday night we do, now it's virtual, but we have a Monday night youth group that meets every Monday evening, and that's open to young people, and that's open to all young people. Particularly, it's really focused on LGBT identities, but there's a lot of times folks are allies, maybe children of LGBT families, and things of that sort. Cool.
So we could refer some people to you, to that group?
Yes.
Awesome.
Yes, and so yeah, you can look up GLSEN, GLSEN Greater Cincinnati Youth Group on Facebook is like one place that it's located, and then, but I can get you all, when I send the information to Jennifer with like follow-up from today, I can send you all resources, yeah.
Great.
I will say for individuals who are adults that you're working with, it can sometimes be tough there's not as many, like there's some programming for youth, but if you graduate from high school and you don't immediately go to college, there's not always a lot that's available to you, because there's not a dedicated center or space. And so sometimes it can be tough making connections for adults. But there are a number of programs that are sometimes online or different groups to get involved in that I can share. I think Holly asked about resources, that we can kind of share local resources for that. And then Kate, you asked about creating a climate that is inclusive, friendly regarding trans individuals. And we talked about things. Is there other questions or other pieces on that that you wanted us to talk about?
Well, I guess one of my, this is just a thought, it's not well formed, so please excuse any clumsiness. It's just that, sometimes I might, and this doesn't apply to me currently in my workplace, but I think, it's one of those things, like if I think that perhaps the person I am with is trans, that I understand and believe that that is their business. But I also, like now I am thinking about my workplace, like if there were ways to make sure that the workplace is a place where people can feel like they can come out. I think like the idea of the pronouns, obviously there needs to be more than that. Like the fact that we are requiring LGBTQ trainings, and we really are trying as an organization to do well around this topic, both for staff and for clients. But for sure, it's everyone is in a different place on it, and I don't know. It's just like I actually know a lot of trans people in my life, and I don't know, like
Yeah.
I think I might slip up and like talk about it when it's none of my business to bring it up. I don't know. I'm not sure what exactly I'm asking. Sorry.
It's all right. No, I think a couple things like as you were chatting that like came to mind is one, I think just that recognition that sometimes people might be afraid to come out. So sometimes there's an aspect of just being really thoughtful around what media you're consuming, what language are you consuming, like what, different things just sometimes can let people know if you might be more open. Like there's sometimes there's safe space stickers that sometimes people will put on office doors, or they don't have an office door, will sometimes put on the back of like planners or name tags or different things just that sometimes might be visible when they're out in public and somebody might see. Things that like rainbow or HRC stickers, different things that people might be comfortable with, some of those pieces. I think the other piece specifically for the YWCA, to think about is, as knowing what I know, about the organization and its commitment, doing racial justice and inclusion and different things, know that the YWCA is inclusive. But I think some folks who don't know might just sometimes look at the name and think about the W being just for women and being, exclusive, or the C for Christian, and thinking about it being exclusive, and like those aspects, knowing that that's not, I think, as the YWCA presents. The YWCA, is a more inclusive organization, but it's also sometimes like, are we intentional about putting some of that out? And that might be something internally for conversations on, to recognize that, people can't just know. If people don't know about our work, then they might not see us as a resource. So how do we understand like that piece?
I have a question.
Yeah.
So what do you do when you do trip up and use the wrong gender pronoun for somebody, or somebody's transitions? Like my specific situation, my childhood best friend sibling is transgender. I see him at weddings and funerals maybe, right? So I don't have a lot of practice. I can't fold his laundry and put it in. Yeah. And I'm like terrified of running into her and slipping up. So what do you do if you slip up in the morning and I say, hey, Ben, instead of hey, Ren,
Yeah. So I think one piece I'll just share is that like names never have a pronoun. So if we don't know someone's pronouns, we can say their name.
Yeah.
And that's one of the things, if we notice that, that story of Sky that we looked at, there were no pronouns in Sky's story. Every sentence had Sky wears this, Sky does this. And so it was just kind of using their name. So that's one thing to sometimes have that. I think if we do mess up though, apologize, but trying to do it in a way of intention. I've had, older teachers sometimes who are supportive though, tell me when I tell my kids when they come out to me, I'm old. Takes my brain a little bit of time to rewire, and but I am doing my best, and I want to be really intentional about supporting you, and naming it and being clear that this isn't because of me somehow trying to show I'm not accepting, but more if I do mess up, just be sorry, I'm working on it. And I think when people recognize that there is that, there's that effort being applied, then I think they appreciate that, versus more they were trying to either minimize or trivialize someone else's identity or experience. And so just that recognition of that. But I think there is that part of just, make sure if I don't know someone's pronouns, I just say the name that they have given me. You know, and I think the other piece too is it happens like we've got a couple kids at camp who are trans, non-binary, who every year they show up to camp, they've picked a new name. And it was like, and so you're just like, all right, like, and then, but it's always too, like, parents fill out the registration form. Campers don't fill out the registration form. So the campers show up and they're using a name different than what the parents have put down, you know, sometimes. And so sometimes it's just like, you know, like, all right, like we're going to be making name tags at registration. So like, what name would you like on your name tag? Yeah. And just being like, okay, that's, that's good. So where there's opportunity to sometimes have that, I think, like, placed, but.
So one more question, if that's okay. I know we're a little over time.
Yeah.
And this one's pretty specific. So I run a program for female identifying people for us. And we do ask them on their application to list their pronouns. I'm just toying with, so we create name tags for them. We create table tents for them. And it's all set up when they get there in the morning. These are young professional adults. I'm toying with whether we should just add a checkbox that says, may we include your pronouns on your name tag in table 10. Is that an appropriate way to go about that, where there's no pressure one way or another, but the option is there? Okay.
Yeah, I think that's great. And I think, because I think too, like, I think that shows an intention of, you know, like, we want to make sure that, like, this is, you know, part of that. And so I think, I'm assuming you're talking about Rising Stars. Yeah. Yeah. and so I have some friends who are in it or have done it. But yeah, so I think, like, when you're doing, I think any leadership development program too, the more you can be intentional about, like, modeling acts of inclusion, I think can be really important for people to take that. Because when you think about a Rising Stars or, you know, leadership programs from the Chamber, Chamber from what have you, like, you get these folks from all sorts of different agencies. And then they go back and, like, and that's an opportunity for a ripple effect that they're creating change in ways that they haven't maybe thought of.
Well, I'm mad that I didn't do it this year. We're just welcoming a new class, and I'm like, darn, I missed my opportunity. That would have been good.
But yeah, but I like the creativity of just, like, putting that from the onset of, like, having that be there.
Okay.
And then Kate also mentioned, the age group for GLSEN is mainly middle and high school students, and then PFLAG. So PFLAG used to stand for Parents, Family, and Friends of Lesbian and Gays. And just like GLSEN used to also be an acronym, but because it's limiting, has just become just GLSEN or just PFLAG. But its focus is really on community support. And so PFLAG meets usually second Tuesday of every month. They're also meeting virtually right now, but they also have a parent helpline and wonderful resources. So that story that we looked at from Sky, like, that's one of the PFLAG resources that we you know, kind of integrate into our work as well. So cool. Awesome. So I will be, go ahead, Kate.
And that doesn't have to be just parents or family. It could be, like, if you as a professional wanted to go to PFLAG because you had questions, or you, and it's a safe space too. Like, if you could find an individual in that group to talk to. Like, if you're uncomfortable with the topic of one of these topics, you could say, hey, is someone willing to talk to me privately about this? And usually somebody is.
Yeah.
Anyways, I find that because, you know, that way you can process things with people who kind of have some understanding about it.
Yeah, I agree. And I think, like, one of the things, like, it is a little different now that they're virtually, but when they were in person, they'd meet on the second Tuesday of every month. It's at Mount Auburn Presbyterian. And so both GLSEN and PFLAG use Mount Auburn Presbyterian. They're not religious groups. It's just they provide free space. So just want to mention that in case anyone is not comfortable meeting in a church. We're just kind of recognizing that there's no religious connection. But usually there's like a 45-minute presentation, and then people count off and have small group conversations. And that's where sometimes you're in a group of 4 or 5 people and you just kind of chat and can kind of connect and see what you want. And you've got folks who are, you know, because sometimes in the small groups, people tell their story. And so there's Tom, you know, who listen, and he's like, my daughter came out in 1982. But it was like, there's this dynamic sometimes PFLAG says, is like, when you no longer need PFLAG, PFLAG needs you. And it's this aspect of, like, you know, folks aren't there for a long time because they're still processing. Like, they're very supportive of their families, you know, if they have children or whatnot, but they're there to kind of help support others who are just navigating this. And yeah, so it's not just parents, but I think, yeah, people in the community. And so PFLAG is a great resource. Awesome. So I know we're a little over, so I thank you all for the great conversations. There will be, as you see this is recording, we'll be sharing a recording and resources. So if there's anyone else that didn't get to watch this that you wanted to share resources with or share the video with, those will be coming along through email in the next day or two.